everyone. Welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Solène and Jack. Where in the world are you coming from?
I'm in Dubai in the UAE.
I'm Atlanta, Georgia, USA.
And I'm coming from New Mexico in the United States. So last week we posted a video about BPD and apologies, making amends, and we got some comments from our viewers about over-apologizing, which was something that we didn't really have a chance to address when we filmed the original episode. So we're going to talk about over-apologizing today. If this or other BPD-related topics interest you, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss anything. So just to start us off, what are some of your experiences with over-apologizing?
Yeah, I tend to apologize. Because I feel guilty about stuff. So
Yeah, I tend to over-apologize as well. For me, I link it to the fact that I will prioritize relationships with people, and I'm just so scared of the relationship being impacted, the person's feelings, and also my own fear of abandonment, and that all gets bundled into a lot of apologizing for anything and everything, you know, being 5 minutes late, being 5 minutes early, forgetting something, things that can be very mundane, like can seem like day-to-day things. And I didn't really notice it until like more recently being in this space with lots of people talking about mental health openly, lots of things. And I get so many people telling me, Solène, you don't need to apologize for this. It's okay. You don't need to apologize to me. I'm like, oh, did I? Oh, okay.
yeah.
It's so interesting because, you know, when we were originally filming the apologies episode, I know you and I, Jack, we talked a little bit about, like, I'm the bad guy. I don't owe you an apology. But then on the flip, and it's so interesting because, like, people seem to think that you are, like, one way or the other. And I think, like, you and I maybe are similar. It's very situational, where it's like, if you feel like I'm super justified, like, there's no way I'm going to apologize. But then on the flip
100%.
side, there's this, like, almost like the fear of somebody being disappointed or whatever, and it's almost like a preemptive apology to try to avoid getting into the conflict in the first place. I don't know if you relate to that at all, but
For me, it's the fact that low-key, I'm a nice person deep down. I may have this rough, tough exterior, but deep down, I'm gooey, a big crybaby. That's the thing. Like, yeah, I say, oh yeah, I'm the bad guy. I'll do whatever I want to. F you. I turn around, someone look at me the wrong way, I bust down crying. Like, I'm so sorry if I did anything that hurt you. I'm like, yeah. It's like, I think it's that really like low key, we're nice people on the inside and we don't want to be mean.
yeah.
And it's back to that extreme. I think the black and white thinking can come into play here as well,
100%.
where it's either like all mask on and rage out, or it's like mask off and sadness and grief and everything coming out. I also reflected on, like, I think it's changed for me over time. One is, like, in my past, I didn't apologize. I grew up in a family where we don't apologize. We put everything under a giant rug and we just don't talk about it. So we'll argue and then we just pretend nothing ever happened. So I grew up in this environment, so I never really apologized for pretty much anything. But I kept this bottled guilt and shame inside of me. You know, there's still apologies that I would like to make, but I don't even know how because it's been so long. And I feel like I've kind of overcompensated. And then obviously moving to a culture in the UK and then in Australia where people apologize a lot. I mean, there's this, you know, this joke that we make in France that in the UK is the country where if someone bumps into you, you bump into them on the subway, they will apologize. They will say, sorry, but you bumped into them. Whereas in France, it's like, you know, F you and all the things that Jack said, right? So it's just completely different. So I think suddenly I was also in a different culture where apologies was like a thing we did all the time. So then now I'm like apologizing all the time in my present, but I still have like all those things in the past that I haven't apologized for yet.
It's funny you brought up culture, because what you apologize really is almost like a cultural thing. Like you said, you know, your culture will push a lot of stuff under the rug. I come from a culture that does that too. And sometimes in my culture, especially if you're young, you are expected to apologize for stuff that you maybe didn't even do because you're the child, and that tends to build up a resistance to apologizing after a while. Because you were forced, like I said in the last video, if you were forced to apologize, you really don't want to do it no more because you lose power.
You know, what's so interesting about the culture thing is that in some ways I feel like Solène and I have very similar backgrounds because we both came from families that are very logical, science sort of minded, right? The like, this is how it goes. And, you know, Solène, for you, it was like, you know, it was like, we'll have an argument, we never apologize. In my family, it was a little bit different because they're hyper logical. It's like, this is why apologies are important. And in a way, because I was not very good at handling guilt or shame, I did whatever I could to basically rationalize myself out of having to give any apologies when I was young. And that ended up really serving me badly in the long run because it's taken me a really long time to realize that I can rationalize myself into almost anything. I can explain to myself like, oh, this makes total sense. And that's a little bit of a tangent. I don't want to continue on that thought, but I just want to bring that up because I think it's so interesting how like a lot of like similar things can have like branch off into these
100%.
different and in terms of apologies, now I over apologize a lot more than I used to. And in my recovery, I've talked about this before, where it's kind of like a pendulum swing, where I went from one extreme in the beginning, I lash out, I'm just like a, you know, verbal diarrhea and like emotions everywhere, and I'm gonna be angry at you and rah. And then like through recovery, I learned some interpersonal skills, but then I like took it way too far to the other direction, where it was like, I'm gonna take responsibility for everything all the time, and I'm always gonna apologize. So the shame piece, I didn't realize that I felt shame, and so I used to just be angry. And then when I started to learn to actually feel sadness or shame or any of the other emotions that I didn't really like, I realized that and I hate to admit this, but I think in some cases, not on purpose, but used over apologizing as a way to almost try to manipulate people into not being angry at me. Where it's like, if I fall to pieces and I'm sad and pathetic, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'm just a pathetic mess, like, you shouldn't even deal with me. It's kind of like a backwards way of trying to make people then feel sorry for me so that I don't have to face that shame. You know, it's like I said, rationalizing anything. I can find a way. It's like, even the shame, I'll find a way to make this shame not my fault because it's so hard to sit with that emotion. I spent 30 years of my life not knowing I felt shame. And so it's only through recovery that I've recognized that emotion, and it is, I mean, I'm a lot better at it now, but it is hard to sit with, man. It is hard to sit with.
It is.
Whereas I feel like I just grew up in a puddle of shame, trying to swim an ocean of shame, and feeling inadequate and broken and not belonging, you know, where I was. Now it's fascinating, and there's definitely a huge link there with shame, guilt, and that aspect of like over apologizing. And it is so hard to find that middle point of the pendulum where you are not playing the victim to get away with something, you are owning up to your actions, but you're not either like taking the full ownership. And that's what I would do. So I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, you know, best friend at university, like we got on like a house on fire, like it was amazing. And then looking back now, I can realize that she split on me. She doesn't have a BPD diagnosis, but it was really like that. And we had this conversation, and she was so angry with me, and she just, you know, everything came out. And I just took entire ownership of her being angry with me, even though she didn't really clearly explain like why it was. And like she, you know, gave it to me for like 2 hours straight. I was in pieces. I was depressed for like 6 months after that, physical symptoms, everything. But the whole entire time I would tell other people, I would be like, it was totally my fault. It was entirely my fault. I totally deserved it. Even though I still, like to this day, don't really quite know what happened. And she since 6 years later apologized to me and said, you know, I completely lost it. I was going for a lot, and you were the closest person to me, and you just took the fire. So 6 years later, I got that closure that actually it was not my fault. But the whole time not only did I apologize to her in the moment overly, I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. But on top of that, I basically apologized to her, to everybody we knew, taking it, the entire responsibility, out of fear of being the bad person, in an attempt of taking the littlest space possible, in an attempt of not being disliked, in an attempt of, not knowing, getting that confirmation of what I felt that I always knew, which was, I'm broken, I don't belong, I don't deserve to live, etc.
I think that's sort of where some of our comments about over apologizing are sort of from, is this like the sacrificing your self-respect for the sake of the relationship, and sometimes like abusive relationships, which can be a big problem when you're constantly sacrificing your self-respect. And I know like we outside of the show have talked about that a little bit. I don't know if that's something that you're willing to bring up, but if you are, how does sacrificing your self-respect over the long term, how did that affect you when you're always picking the relationship over yourself?
It affected me a lot. I think it was, I already didn't have a sense of who I was. So when you don't have that strong sense of identity and you keep prioritizing relationships over your self-respect, it's like a vicious cycle that keeps feeding each other. And the lower I felt mentally, the lower my self-respect was, and therefore like I felt like I had no other option than to put everybody else first anyway. And because I was so convinced that I was a horrible person, like I didn't see how putting my self-respect first was gonna end in any positives, in any way, shape, or form. Recently, I've tried to, that's what Xannie was referring to, I've tried to put my self-respect first, and it was really interesting because it was I'm doing this project with a friend, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna let this person know that I don't feel like we're putting even like amount of work into this project, and we're gonna discuss it, and because I'm gonna put my self-respect first, woohoo, it's gonna help with the objective and the relationship, and it's gonna be this amazing thing. And Xannie really helped me in that moment, because we had a conversation and she reminded me that when you put a different aspect of those three things, relationship, objective, and self-respect first, so say you put self-respect first, you have to be aware that the other two may be impacted. So it's not a case of like a happy win-win-win all the time. It can happen, great, but it's not always going to happen. And that trade-off I find very difficult, because I know what it feels like to put my self-respect last. I've done it for 30 plus years. So it's become like really difficult, it's almost this sense of attachment. And I think there is a weird sense of attachment to say, I'm a giver, I'm going to show up as this amazing person, because you're so scared of showing up as yourself and being disliked or casted out or excluded in some way. What do you think about this, Jack?
I'm kind of going through a situation like that right now with somebody who, like you say, we don't have a sense of identity really like that, a sense of self. And that person is somebody who I low-key for a long time idolized and try to make myself into them. And it took me a long time to realize that I do love them from the bottom of my heart, but it's toxic. I don't want to lose myself in order to keep this relationship going. Because I need an apology too from them, but it's a lot of pride goes into it too when you try to apologize, because you have to put your pride aside, your ego aside, and all that, and because in order to give a truly heartfelt apology to try to move forward with a relationship, you have to mean it. And if you can't let go of your pride and your ego, you can't move forward with a true apology. And even over apologizing, that means you really have no pride in yourself sometimes. When you constantly apologize, like you gotta build up that pride again, build up that sense of self, who you are. Hell, be selfish sometimes, be a little bit egotistical, but that means that you're putting yourself first.
Yeah, I think you you bring up a really important point about, like, it doesn't really mean anything if you don't act, like, if you're just doing it to, like, assuage the situation, but you don't actually have feeling in it. I think that for me is part of what makes me feel sick if I do sort of like a performative apology, which is sort of on the pendulum swing, right? That was when I went from the angry lash out to like over apologizing and taking too much ownership of things that weren't my problem, right? In that space, I felt like I had to apologize for things, even if they weren't things that I actually thought were my fault, because I knew what the person I had been before, I knew what that was like. And I felt like I had some control when I was over apologizing because it made people happier with me in the moment, especially if there was like a serious conflict, right? Always taking ownership, it made it easier for people to be around me because they didn't have to take ownership for themselves. But I started to feel really sick, like emotionally sick afterwards, because it was a lie, you know. And for me, as somebody who really values honesty, it was like in the moment I didn't think I was being dishonest by just like trying to solve the problem. But the reality is that apologizing when you don't mean it is dishonest.
Yeah, but you see, like when I over apologize, I always mean it. Because in that moment, especially when I was at the height of my BPD, like I don't have any self-respect. Like I genuinely hate myself. And I'm not saying that for people to say, oh no, da da da. I genuinely feel, I believe in every bit of my DNA, in every breath that I take, that I hate myself. So over apologizing is honest, because I'm like, of course it's all my fault. I'm a horrible person. I don't deserve to be alive. So it makes total sense. So it's interesting that,
I think when I say that, it's like, I think the problem with the shifting identity is that in the moment it does feel honest. Because from that moment to the next, you are a different person, right? And so like, and that's why I often say it has nothing to do with the conscious. It's not like I'm sitting there actively thinking I'm making this up. In the moment, I'm doing whatever I can to try to like assuage my pain or my fear or whatever. And then later, after I'm outside the context of that situation, I usually look back and I feel sick because I'm like, why did I say that? Now that I'm not emotionally activated anymore, I don't even really think that was my fault. But I said that it was in the moment because that's what I thought because that's what seemed true, especially if somebody else is really convinced. If they're really defensive and angry, then you're like, okay, it must be my fault. You're kind of like taken over by their emotion, right?
It's the thing, you're taking your both are right. Like BPD is black and white thinking. So you're both right. In the moment you may feel like you're right, 100%, I truly mean it. That's the black, but when you're back in the white thinking, it's like, did I really mean that? Do I really need to apologize for that? It's black and white thinking. It is or it isn't. There's hardly any middle ground for us. Truly apologizing is that gray area. It's a fine line. That's that gray for us. So like y'all both are right. It really depends on the situation and the moments, honestly.
Well, like other people's emotions can take you over. When somebody else, especially like for me, I think it's if you're in a disagreement and somebody else is upset with me, it's hard not to take their emotions in the moment as fact. I think this is why it's so difficult, is because like in the moment, it really feels real. It really feels like, oh, I'm this horrible person. This is what I need to do. And then after the intensity of the emotion goes away and I'm like, I just threw my self-respect out the window. I let that other person's emotions be reality. And I just like killed my inner self in that moment for the sake of the relationship. But then the problem is like, I have ended up agreeing to things that I didn't really in the long term want to agree to. Because in that moment, that's what I thought I needed to do because the other person had really strong feelings about it. And then later I was like, oh, shuds.
I think like what happens as a result of that is the internal conflict then, because you're basically having a second argument, but within yourself, where it's like, why did I apologize for that? They were wrong. I should have said this, should have done that. And this happens to me so much because indeed I feel overwhelmed by the other person's emotion, especially if it's anger. I take accountability for absolutely everything under the sun. It's raining, yeah, it's my fault. Like this is me, I take it, and then I'm home on my sofa and I'm like, oh my God, why did I should have said this, should have said that. And I replay it again and again and again. And I ruminate and I'm really, really down on myself. And it's impacting even more that self-worth, that self-respect. Yeah.
Ruminating, that kills us. That kills us because it sits in our head. It sits on our consciousness. Even if it wasn't our fault, like you said, it will still just kill us on the inside because we're thinking about it all. It's like a stew. It's like a crock pot. The longer it sits, the worse it gets. Like I hate them. Like I ruminate so much about stuff. Like stuff from 5-10 years ago, I still think about and it just sits on me. Rumination is what kills us, especially when it comes to apologizing. Even if we mean it and it was our fault, we still ruminate and still feel guilty and shame about it. It's like rumination, that's the worst.
The rumination that gets to me is I almost will have an obsession about something being my fault. And it's almost like it has to be my fault, because if it's not, then it means I don't have any control in the situation. And it's so backwards, but for me, it really is like, it has to be my fault, because if it's my fault, then there's something I can do to make it better the next time, or I can do something differently to change it. One of the hardest things for me to accept is that it's not my fault, because then it means that I am helpless and it's up to somebody else. And I hate that feeling, that helplessness of it not being up to me. Ooh, that just goes and goes. I convince myself it has to be my fault. I have to be able to do something differently. I have to be able and I will drive myself crazy trying to solve things when it's not my fault because I want that control, but I end up burning myself out because it's not something that I actually am at fault for. One of the things I've really been working on over the last few years is trying to maintain my sense of self in an argument, because my day-to-day life, my sense of self is not an issue. But when emotions get heated, that's where the lines start blurring for me about who I am. So I've really been trying to hold on to my identity. It's very difficult to do in those emotional situations, but really, if I need to take a pause or tell somebody hey, I need to think about this for a few minutes and just sit there thinking about it, trying to check the facts to see how I really feel about it, because I am done agreeing to things and apologizing for things that are not my fault, because every single time it ends up biting me in the butt later. In the moment, I always think it's solving the problem, but I feel sick about it later. And, sometimes I make agreements that are really against my values just because I wanted to avoid a bigger conflict. And I do not want to keep doing that, because it's not only a disservice to me, but it's a disservice to the other person, because they're not really getting my true self.
Yeah, I think that piece around being mindful of where the other person starts, where the other person ends, what's their emotion in that moment, what's my emotion in that moment, how is their emotion fueling my emotion, that's something that I've done a lot of work on. So I'll feel this is, something is rising in me, and then I'll be okay, observe, describe, in my own head. I'm not obviously I'm telling the other person in the middle of the argument, so this is what's happening to me. But just to create that distance, because I've always been a sponge to other people's emotions without even realizing it. I would suddenly be sad or angry or anxious, and I'm I don't even know why. And it's because I've had a conversation just before with someone who had that emotion, and I've just taken it on as my own. So that's been really helpful. Another thing is, we've touched on it, is objective relationship and self-respect, and thinking, if I'm sensing that we're about to have some kind of difficult conversation, thinking about what's the most important for me in that moment, and also how to prepare just one sentence of the ideal scenario of what I want for each of them, and bring it up, obviously not in such an obvious way, but just in the conversation. And the other final thing is just exploring how can I honor and practice self-respect in small ways, starting baby steps. There was one thing, I was in a retreat in India, and there was this lady who like took the phone and started talking like super out loud when all of us, the rest of us, were not allowed to have our phones. And I was like, oh, like this is so disrespectful, blah blah blah. But like I was like, I can't say anything because she's nice and I don't want her to hate me. And I was like, girl, this is exactly what you need to practice. You're never gonna see this woman again. So I, did it. I was shaking, I was sweating. It was awful. I hated every minute of it. But it went super well. She was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize, like, and that makes total sense. It would upset you. And then she hugged me. I was like, oh my God, it can work. It can work. So just thinking about the small things, like even like, what do you want to eat for dinner? It sounds like so basic, but when you have no self-respect or very low, it's really hard at the beginning to even think about these things for yourself and voice them to someone else. So that's some of the things that really helped me.
About self-respect, about having pride in yourself, it's all of that. It's finding that gray. That's what it's called that, finding the gray for yourself. Whatever you feel like is that gray where you know it's 100% rational, it's both black and white, take that route. If you know that apology is needed, and you thought about it, that's that gray. Go apologize. Don't apologize for shit that isn't your faults. Don't apologize for shit that you have, that even if somebody's mad at you for a reason and you had nothing to do with it, their reason is irrational, don't apologize for it. Like working at Waffle House, people get mad at server for the food coming out wrong. I don't control how the food cooked. I gave the order the way always give the order. They said they heard it. They said, okay, cool, I'm gonna cook it. They messed up. It's not on me, so I'm not gonna apologize for it. I'm sorry, but that's just me. That's fine. That's fine. The grade.
Don't apologize.
Yeah, don't apologize. Like
I'm not sorry. That's my opinion.
I'm not sorry. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Like we're allowed to have. You're allowed to have your own opinion. Some people may not agree with your opinion, but hey, it's what I know is for me. It's my fact that I know. So just like I said, find that gray area for yourself, and from there, you would know you need to apologize for something or not. Have respect for yourself. Have pride in yourself. You are good enough.
How's your future self gonna feel about or think about the apology the next day or the next week? Mm-hmm. That's what you said is amazing, is brilliant, and that's what came to my mind, that image of like you tomorrow or in 3 weeks from now. Like, are they gonna be like, yeah, this was in my gray area, this made total sense? Or are they gonna be like, why did I apologize? Or are they gonna be like, I should have apologized, oh my God, why didn't I apologize?
Yeah, we all have to make the decisions we can live with in the end.
Yes.
100%.
Thank you everyone so much for watching. We hope you got a nugget of wisdom to take with you on your journey. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss anything. And we'll see you next time.
Peace.